segment of the show for today. We're talking to Dr. E. Kelly Sanford, and the topic is prejudice and racism at the 21st century. And Dr. Sanford, let me bring you back into this second segment that we're talking about and tell you how much we appreciate that information that you gave as a layout for our discussion of prejudice and racism at the 21st century. Let's continue that discussion.
Yes, well, at the last time we were talking about how this prejudice is this unfavorable or favorable toward a person without any warrant. You don't know about it, and people have these actions towards others. Dr. Isabel Wilkerson has an excellent book entitled The Warmth of Other Suns, where she looked at the Great Migration and thought that was a time period in the history of America where people had to move from the South because of hundreds of years of enslavement, Jim Crow laws, and move for new types of life in other areas of the North. And when they went there, they were able to tell the story of the prejudice that was occurring in the South, and that helped to galvanize, according to this text, the civil rights movement. And as you may very well know, this past Sunday, we celebrated the memorial of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and that whole movement that allowed people to have certain freedoms. But another little component that was very interesting in her piece was that those grandchildren and great-grandchildren of those migrants turned out to be Dr. Toni Morrison, Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Thurgood Marshall. All of these great people, because they had that opportunity of freeing themselves from racism and from prejudice and from discrimination, were able to grow and then make contributions into the American society. So I think it's very interesting when we look at that Great Migration period, and to be able to analyze it in that sociological way, to see how just by living in another environment actually gave opportunities for people that they did not have while living in the Deep South because of the nature of prejudice. And there's another piece that I would like to, I think is very important for a conversation like this. It's a classic by Griffin. It's entitled Black Like Me. And you may remember that old classic that we've talked about. When you think in terms of prejudice, it happened to be a European-American male who went to the military and a brief short with it. He was blind and felt that as he just went through his daily life, everybody was always open and willing to help himself get across the street, not walk into a hole, and all of those things. And then miraculously, he got his sight back. And then he saw the prejudice that was out there toward others, and he did something to change his pigmentation and his hair texture, and came to the South, and he experienced prejudice for the first time in his life. European American that just looked a little African American. That's right.
Change.
Just that little change. And then he experienced this prejudice. So the question becomes, to what degree did that occur then, and does it occur now? And of course, I think in Dr. Wilkerson's book, she would say, we've made great changes with prejudice and discrimination and racism from the past to now. We can go into the deepest part of the South and drive our vehicles and turn off and get gas and maybe even rest overnight. And of course, go to the restroom as we need, and at that time you couldn't. But however, given that type of what we make a distinction in sociology, public accommodations that weren't available to us then, we have now. But that type of overt racism that occurred then was kind of obvious. To lynch people, to not allow them to sleep overnight, you better not be in a certain area when the sun will go down. But now you have some of those freedoms. However, there's what we call covert prejudice and covert racism. Even when we look at our President Obama, when he's trying to implement bills to help people nationally in this economic recession that we're in, groups of people are prejudiced and discriminatory toward him to obstruct strategic plans of action that could then help millions of other people, just because he's who he is. And it becomes quite obvious of that. And so when we look at some of those types of symptoms that are there, we still see some of that unfavorable treatment toward a person when we can look back and reflect back on other presidents that had recessionary types of periods of time, and how they may have had certain types of strategic plans over and over again. And it seems like every one that he tries to implement, it comes up negative. So we can see this type of a problem that still exists in the 21st century. And it's not as overt, but this covert type is still very much there.
And it still really doesn't do anything to help the economy at all.
Absolutely.
I think that, as a matter of fact, when we talk about racism and prejudice at the 21st century, I think that one thing we have to be concerned about is that our young people, you see, because many of those who are of an age of myself, I know, really, we've gone through that, but many of our young people don't understand exactly what the whole situation is, and they don't know how to react in reference to it. What could you say to our young people today in reference to how they ought to be able to deal with these
That's
issues?
a very excellent question, and I deal with them in all my classes, and I know there's what we would refer to as a lot of apathy. They have this false sense that everything is just so fair and equal because they can indeed go any place that they want to go. And still, when we look in the labor market, the job force for women, you know, you find inequity there within hiring. You find practices of people not being fair in job hiring because of different ethnic groups still not being present. And since sometimes people will have a false sense of reality, if you will, because of the prejudice, discrimination, and racism that still is so persistent in our society, but they have this false sense that it's not there. And as a result of that, might not be trying to develop themselves to prepare for a technological age in which we're living in, because we still have to have those competencies of being able to speak, or being able to write, or being able to be ambitious, or being aggressive. All of those same things that were in the past are still there today. But this idea of prejudice and how people will look at you in another way, or going back to our President of the United States, you can see how excellent he is, how smart he is, and all of the credentials that he has, and still that peculiar prejudice that's there toward him in the policies that he's trying to work with everyone on a bipartisan level, but you can still see the prejudice that's there. And I'm hoping that it's obvious to those viewers out there, for him, I'm talking about across the nation, that other groups are not being supportive in that way.
And that somehow we can somehow have an America that is unlike the America that was anticipated by W.E.B. Du Bois, that is still a problem of the color of the 20th century. It will not be the problem that we will have to deal with throughout the 21st century. Is that what we're saying?
That's absolutely
in a real
right.
sense that it is about time.
Yes.
And I think that we've got about 30 seconds before the end of this show, or the end of this period. Before the end of this period, and then we'll come back and talk about some other things in reference to it. But that's essentially what we wanted to deal with, and perhaps during this last period, over the last few seconds, we can still be able to work out some kind of what we might be considered a solution. And of course, we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break.